So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on this wonderful session today. I'm really, really excited to have these three wonderful ladies on the panel today. Sounds it's going to be a very exciting conversation. So I'll start introducing everybody just very shortly. So we have Claire Culliford, and she's a fiction and educational children's author. Cindy Forde, founder of Planetary, and Marion Leeper, storyteller. And so it's basically we go back to Forde now, and we'll start with Marion. Marion, I'll just stop sharing my screen so everybody can see you, and I'll do spotlight on you so everybody can see you. Now, there you go. Go ahead, Marion. Oh, you're mute.
I think I'd know by now. Thank you, Antoinette. It's so exciting to be here with such a wonderful group of women. And I'm going to kick the session off, because I'm a storyteller, with a story. And this one comes from the Marshall Islands. And I came across it in a talk by the Marshall Islands poet and activist, Kathy Yetmil-Kielner. And they say in the Marshall Islands that long, long ago, Sky Mother had 10 fine sons. And she brought them up on a little island in the middle of the ocean. And those young men, they went out in their canoes every day, exploring their island, fishing and swimming and playing, until times changed. The sea level rose. The salt water poisoned the soil, and the crops wouldn't grow. And the islanders knew that they would have to leave their homeland and find a new place. But who would guide them? Who would be their leader? Well, any one of Sky Mother's 10 sons would make a fine leader. But which one? So in the end, the brothers decided that they would have a race. They'd race to the island that shone like an emerald on the horizon. And the winner would become leader of the people. So the day came, and all the 10 brothers, they were lined up along the shore in order of age, oldest to youngest. But before they could start, Sky Mother appeared, bent almost double under the weight of a huge bundle. And she went up to the oldest brother, Timur, and she said, "Son, take me in your canoe with you." And I looked at his mother and he said, "Mother, with a weight like that, you'll slow me down, I'll lose the race." And he wouldn't let her in his canoe. And she asked the next one, and the next, and the next, until at last she came to the youngest, Jabro. And she said, "Jabro, will you take me?" And Jabro, he looked at his mother with eyes of love, and he said, "Get in, mother." And then the signal was given, and they were off, and the 9 older brothers, they pushed their canoes lightly into the water, and they sped off across the sea. Jabro, it was hard work pushing that great bundle full of cloth and sticks and twine. And as hard as he paddled, he could not catch up. But meanwhile, Sky Mother, she was unwrapping that bundle. The cloth, a great triangle, woven out of pandanus leaves, a beautiful pattern. It was the first sail. And Sky Mother showed Jabro how to fit the rods together to make a mast, how to attach the sail and step it in the boat, how to tie the tackle to the blocks, and how to angle that sail. And soon he was flying across the water, overtaking one brother after the next, after the next. And when the other brothers arrived at the island, They found Sky Mother already garlanding Jabril as the new leader. And a wise leader he was. And it's said that when the time came, Sky Mother took all 10 of her sons to live in the sky with her. And the people of the Marshall Islands, they have a constellation, we call it the Seven Sisters, but they call it the 10 Brothers. And the brightest of those stars they call Jabril. And when Jabril's shining in the sky, then they know that they will have fine weather and good fishing, and they'll get safely home. And that's my story to start off the discussion. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Marion. Thank you so much. Great way to start the discussion. Now, and next then is Cindy. Cindy.
Hi, it's a real delight to be here, and thank you so much for the beautiful story, Marion, about collaboration and working together and respect and wisdom for what has gone before. So I think that does make a really nice opening. I'm Cindy Forde. I'm the founder of Planetary, which is an education organisation that is dedicated to enabling children to understand Earth as a beautiful interconnected system and to be the entrepreneurs and the innovators of a better world. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is some thoughts about how we can actually put Earth and why we need to do that, put Earth at the centre of education if we want to achieve a world that works for everyone. And I don't have a beautiful story for you, I'm afraid, so the best I can do is share my screen. I hope some of the images and the thoughts that I share will be will be as entertaining, or perhaps not as entertaining as Marion's story, but will provoke ideas. So the question that we're asking at Planetary is, how do we scale education fit for the future in time to make a difference? We know that we have a very short window of time to do this because we have really within the next decade to work out how we're going to get the temperature rise on Earth to less than 1.5 degrees. So we are in quite a tight spot. We, as most of you will, I'm sure everybody on the call knows, we've got this situation where the human impact now affects the very controls of planet Earth, and yet our education systems are still not incorporating that. They haven't shifted terribly since the Industrial Revolution. We have, however, got these glorious ambitions, these 2030 goals, which says this is the kind of world, 17 goals that paint a roadmap to the kind of world that we'd like to see by 2030. So surely that would give us a baseline, a signpost to the type of education that we should be providing to leave, as Marion so beautifully illustrated in her story, no one behind, to put the wind in our sails. And we can see how vital what we're taught is. I mean, some of these statistics are a real food for thought. The people who have brought us to this pass and the leadership is really people who've been very well educated, and only around 3% of people do go to university, but they take up 80% of the leadership positions. So something that we're teaching in our system is replicating this pattern that's actually fueling our demise. So we have to think really seriously about how we can shift that. We all know it's very clear now that Earth is our life support system. It's an incredible piece of technology. At the very least, it's a living system at the most. And unless we can understand how that works, then we cannot create the solutions that will enable it to be to maintain planetary health well enough to sustain all life here. And yet you can go right through the school system barely hearing a mention of climate change, let alone all the other deeply complex systems that enable Earth to function properly. We also want to need to look at the lens of what are we actually teaching. We have this model of Earth that has brought us to this point in civilization, but it is very much a one-sided story, stories being the critical thing here, because the stories that you tell determine the world that you believe, that you live in. And we've had this huge myth making around colonization, around empire, around greed is good. We had a prime minister who said that really 2 days ago, it's capitalism and greed that have enabled us to found the vaccine for the coronavirus. But there's all the health service workers, all the scientists, all the knowledge and the passion that went into creating that, the humanity that was just dismissed because we're still telling ourselves this story of dominance. So these two images are really the flip side of that. This is a stunning professor, Jack D. Forde, who looks at the whole building of America through the eyes of the First Nations people, which tells a very, very different story, one in which really Columbus has cannibalized the land that he discovered. So it's time to look through a much more global lens in shaping our story of Earth for the young people who will inherit these issues. Yet again, you can go right through school without hearing stories from other cultures. You can hear, people are put in these boxes that have been created for them by these old stories, and the voices aren't there to start giving a very different, much more rounded picture of Earth. And I think one of the most tragic stories that we tell are the economics. This is the absolutely brilliant Dr. Kate Raworth, who some of you may know has written the book Donut Economics, and donut economics are now at work in cities like Amsterdam, in whole countries like Costa Rica. And she's really offering us a different way of creating values in our society that looks at how we sustain a baseline standard of living for all humans and living creatures without disrupting the major planetary boundaries, because it's utterly shocking that we are at this stage of human knowledge and development, that we're still basing our economic models on endless growth when we know that we live on a finite planet, so that the maths just doesn't add up there. And yet somehow we're the rabbit in the headlight that can't shift how we actually value the things that make life here possible. Many of you will have seen this Dasgupta report, which which goes into far more erudite detail on that than I can. But what's very interesting about that report is that he says, I'd like to see an understanding of nature given a prominent place in education as the 3 R's. And when we start doing that, our children will evolve as people who can answer who will be problem solvers rather than problem inheritors. It's not surprising that most teachers now feel that this education system isn't fit for the times we live in. It's fit for the world as it was rather than the world as it is and it will be. And I think it is time now, and hopefully COVID has given us pause to reflect on what are we educating people for anyway. One of those global goals is everybody to be educated by 2030, to get education across, but what kind of education are we rolling out? We've actually, it's really about educating people to take up this role as consumers. And that work there's a beautiful film called Schooling the World by a filmmaker called Carol Black, and she goes up into the communities in Tibet and Nepal, and of course the young people are delighted to be offered the education, but what they actually start to notice that it's not about acquiring knowledge, it's being taught how you can extract income. It's being turned around, it's all around learning how to make money, which of course we need to understand how to sustain ourselves, but that's at the expense of all the values of cooperation, compassion and kindness that actually build a society that functions in the long term. And this is Helena Norberg Hodge, who's the founder of and director of Local Futures. And again, she's looking at, yes, Indigenous education systems or traditional education systems weren't perfect, but what they did enable you to do was to survive in your ecosystem. Whereas now children are educated, divorced from anything to do with nature. And then on the micro level, when these children were taken out of their immediate ecosystems and returned to their villages, they could no longer function. They didn't have the knowledge to work with the land or to work with the natural systems that sustain their communities. And that's happening now on a larger scale because humanity, as you know, we've extracted, the educated people have extracted ourselves. So we're so divorced from our ecosystem. We don't know where our food really comes from. We don't know the impacts of the things that we throw away, where is away, by the way. And so we can no longer survive in our environment on the large scale because we can't make those connections. This is our anthropologist, Wade Davis, and I just like the questions that he asked in terms of how we, if we asked questions differently and saw nature differently, we would have a different relationship with Earth. The communities in the Western communities in Colorado will see this, a mountain, as something that you extract resources from, whereas a community in Peru can see this as a living being that can shape your destiny. Now, the religious myths and fables aside, that does frame how you understand Earth. If you have this reverence for nature, you're unlikely to extract to the extinctions that we're now facing. And he talks about his own, where he grew up. He grew up amongst the First Nations people in British Columbia. And, you know, you have the Western view of the forest simply as resources for raw materials, whereas the First Nations people saw it as the home, you know, this spiritual home that supported an interconnected web of life. The Western views dominated. Those forests don't exist anymore. We don't have the carbon sinks that perform the essential ecosystem services of sustaining planet Earth. So I think there is a lot to learn from Indigenous wisdom. We don't want to go backwards, but we want to bring this way of thinking into the solution, into solving how we all as a global community now move forward. This is Tyson Yonkaporta. He's written a fascinating book called Sand Talk, Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And you know, the basic premise is that there's an ability to hold much more complexity rather than this single issue. If I want coal, I go down the mine, I dig it up. I don't understand the release, you know, that releases greenhouse gases. It makes me very rich in the short term, but you can't think into the interconnected web. Whereas the indigenous people were able to think 7 generations ahead and understand the interconnections much more completely. Even the way the school systems are formed to extract children from their lived environment, lock them up in institutions for, you know, 12, 15 years and expect them to come out with an understanding of how to function in a much more complex world. That's, you know, that's the form of education where your work, where what you learn is really about enabling you to live successfully in the physical and the you know, the social environment that you will need to go out and be part of. And unless you can understand the complexities in your natural world, no matter whether you become a scientist, a hairdresser, or a storyteller, you won't have the knowledge to create solutions that work in harmony, in balance with nature. You'll carry on perpetrating this cycle of destruction that we're in. So I drawing to the end now of setting out where I think we've gone wrong, but this is a fascinating person who you may have heard of, Namonte Nkimo. She's a leader of the Guarani people in Ecuador, and she's just fought and won a historic victory to preserve acres, hectares of the rainforest from an oil company. And she wrote in a beautiful letter to global leaders. And if I can just read a little of it, I would. She talks about a word, Kawari, which means stranger in the Waroni language, but it doesn't have to be a bad word, but you have made it so. For us, the word has come to mean, and in a terrible way, your society has come to represent the white man who knows too little for the power that he wields and the damage that he causes. You're probably not used to an Indigenous woman calling you ignorant, and less so on a platform such as this. But for Indigenous people, it is clear, the less you know something about, the less value it has to you, and the easier it is to destroy. And by And by easy, I mean guiltlessly, remorselessly, foolishly, even righteously. And this is exactly what you're doing to us as an Indigenous people and to our rainforest territories and ultimately to our planet's climate. And I think she puts it so well there. We have this immense knowledge now, immense power without the knowledge to fully understand how to wield it. And so when we do talk about education, it really is education in this framework of how do we get more people into this machine. When the businessmen say, yes, please send us education around the world because there's a shortage of skilled workers. It really is the extension of the process that began in colonization and empire building, really, and education to serve an elite and to pull people into this centralized economic system and away from self-sufficiency and independence. And it probably is in these local solutions that we will find the answers to our systemic problems, rather than trying to make everybody part of a single economic unit. That hasn't really worked. It has actually created a greater division in wealth, a greater inequality in wealth than we've ever seen before. Some people become immensely rich, but other people are either the means of production and their countries are, the raw resources. It doesn't trickle down. We need to find a way to spread it much more equally through the system, which is, yes, we are all interconnected, but we need our own independence and autonomy. So whatever education systems, this is a quote from Doris Lessing, referring to how people were taught in apartheid South Africa, but we are actually indoctrinating people to fit into the system that is of the dominant culture. And now what we're faced with as humans is shifting that, because we're now understanding ourselves as a global community. Unless we can include everybody, work within the life support system that sustains us, we're not going to find the solutions to the very, very pressing systems crisis that we have. So on to the flip side of that is we aren't the wonderful Buckminster Fuller who says don't argue with an old model that's broken, build a new one, and that we're here to be the architects of the future and not its victims. That's kind of what is behind Planetary, the work that I do. I'll quickly whiz through this because we've got Marion and Claire on the call, who are really fabulous practitioners of shifting how we tell stories and educate our children. So the idea is very much that you take over the channels of delivery, the books, the magazines, the media, use the multimedia. We live in an incredible world of technology now, and often the delivery channels for education can be very dry. So we make this a really dynamic and exciting experience for children across multiple dimensions. The heart of that, the core values of this are shifted so that children go to school to learn how to care, to share, and to dare. To care, to understand how Earth works, to share, to understand that by collaborating we will have the breakthroughs that will accelerate the discovery of solutions, and to dare really to drive new models of wealth and well-being, and to think systemically. Sorry, I can't seem to move my screen up. So that's very much what we're here to do, to enable children to be the innovators and entrepreneurs of a better world, so that we can find a way that everybody here can thrive. And the baseline, we're saying, if we've set these 17 goals to get to this world by 2030, then surely our education system should reflect that. And so that forms the basis of a curriculum, really, which is then reinterpreted in a way that's very accessible to children. And the delivery methods are ones that are very exciting and inspiring for children. They go on adventures of learning and discovery, which are interactive. They use a mix of hands-on physical exploration, as you would in a science or discovery centre, and at the same time as as understanding themselves as being a global community of change makers. These children are exploring oceans and they're functioning, keeping us all alive in England. And these children are actually in the Maldives and St. Helena Island, people who are living on threatened communities in the very parts of the planet that we need to preserve to get the oceans to work at full functionality. The little children there who've got the magazine open are in it. That's their island in the centre, and they're really delighted that they've been featured. And now these children are understanding that the St. Helena children have got a huge piece of the puzzle that they need to work with to make sure our oceans work properly. And in terms of the teachers not feeling that they have the support or the knowledge to be able to deliver this in the classroom, teachers do. There's so many astonishing teachers out there, but we're trying to make this as easy as possible for them to deliver. So we create the lesson plans, the digital resources that they can download and use in the classroom, and again, back that up with things in multimedia, the children as activists, as discoverers. They go out and they interview fabulous people like Ben Fogle or Alexandra Cousteau to find out for themselves how these wonderful things work. And then we create little digital apps that enable them to explore those types of learning in a different way. This is taken from a book from the UN, really saying what would education for sustainable development to achieve these goals looks like. And as you can see, it's not being conveyor belted full of facts. It really is the ability to think systemically, to be empathetic, to think critically, to collaborate and to integrate these things into complex problem solving. So that's the baseline of the pedagogy that we're trying to develop. So it's been an absolute pleasure to share that with you. I hope that we'll have time for discussion and questions afterwards, but I'm now very happy to hand over to wonderful Claire, who is doing extremely exciting things in this field. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
So Claire, would you like to share your screen now, and I'll spotlight it for everybody. There we go. And you're mute.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cindy. Can I just say, before I start, obviously, how wonderful it is now to be coming to speak to people about what I do in a way that supports entirely what Cindy has just talked about, the message that Marion got out to us at the beginning of the session, and how exciting what we're talking about today is for me as I go out around the world with the very youngest of children and see in practice how this works and is starting to work. It's exciting times. It's a transition period, and it's lovely to be able to come today and share the journey I've been on and continue to be on with the Little Helpers, my book series. So I'll just share my screen, get the presentation up. 1 second. So thank you so much indeed for having us here today, the Little Helpers and me. We're very proud to be along here as part of the Cambridge Festival. I am an author by profession, but also an educator and a translator. And the Little Helpers came about as a result of combining all of the skills I developed in my professions about 9-10 years ago, when I started to become very, very aware of many of the things Cindy has just highlighted. And in working with older children, became aware that there was a lack of means of getting across to them what was happening with the environmental and climate issues we face in the world in a way that they can engage with very positively. So the Little Helpers book series was developed when I was working with governments and education providers around the world, and they made it apparent over and over again that something was needed for the very youngest members of tomorrow's generation to ensure that they became educated in a way that inspired, but didn't scare or instill fear about these serious issues that, that we're all facing globally. The series, as Cindy just highlighted to us, supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It was purposefully designed to do that, but also it's organically, as I'm developing it, covering many of them multiple times, because they are such important goals for young children to be aware of in a manner that befits their learning, rather than simply maybe looking at a chart. There are 6 books out currently, and there are going to be 30 in total to come over future years. The books, because I come from a language background, are translated into lots of languages already, which means children from China to Brazil to England to Australia can read them. And hopefully, as time goes on, and this has always been really important to me as an author and linguist, when they move into the adult world and when they are talking about what they read as children, there will be that interconnectivity and the ability to unite and know we read the Little Helpers books no matter where in the world they happen to live. And the essence of the books is, to reiterate again what Cindy's just talked to us about, to inspire children to creatively problem solve the real environmental, climate and social issues, many social issues arising from environmental and climate challenges that we're all facing today, and showing them that it can be fun to do so. The series is built around a number of characters, all of them animals, the majority of them now endangered species. Some people are aware of that, but even animals like the hedgehog in one of the books have now become an endangered species. And children relate very well to animals because they transcend culture, nationality, and so that's why I chose to use animal characters. I'm very lucky. People say lovely things about the characters, which makes it a joy to create more of them. And over the coming years, I'm really excited about introducing to the world lots of the new animal characters that are on their way. Thus far, again, like Cindy, what I do, I'm able to take around the world to children in countries often where it's most needed, countries where they have severe issues and are seeing the effects very much of environmental problems and climate issues. So I'm fortunate to have been to a number of UNESCO designated biosphere areas, China, places like Nicaragua. I too have been involved with many indigenous populations, which have not only taught me a lot and informed some of the writing that I do in the series, but have also enabled me to see the importance of incorporating the knowledge that they have into the stories that we show children around the world going forward to create a new narrative, as Cindy has pointed out. I work in media. That's obviously nowadays, that's what I work an awful lot in. And so animation is something that children also engage with, and the series is therefore now going to be animated, albeit at a slightly slower pace than before, owing to events of the last year. I thought it would be nice to share one of the stories in summary via the animation that we've done of it so far.
Oh, hi, I'm Hector. And I'm Harry. We're helping old Mr. Harris, the park keeper, to clean our parks. Hector's Pony Park. There's rubbish all around. Whee! Let's put it in the bins. Don't leave it on the ground. Oh. Oh, thank you, boys.
And as with the song alone, the aim with the series is to highlight to children that our planet is really awesome, and it's really, really important, imperative even, that we do keep it that way, and that if we change the stories that we tell them as time goes on and the stories they're able to create for themselves, then they will be able to create the new world that they want to see, preserving the very best of the world we have currently. Whenever I go around to these events, I'm a children's author, and everybody knows that illustrations form an absolutely huge part of children's books. So I always like to share that this is my partner in crime, the lady who brings all of the characters to life when I explain the vision I have for them in my mind. So she's brought everything from Hector in his park cleaning up rubbish, to Paula helping to prevent air pollution in the forest to life. And she's currently working on an elephant helping to prevent drought, and a panda helping to prevent acid rain. So it's marvelous to be able to work on this consistently with another creative, and just to have fun sharing these messages. As with Cindy as well, over the time I've been taking the books out around the world, my belief that we need a new kind of education system going forward has been strengthened, because I get brought into schools as they feel that what the stories offer up currently isn't present enough in the younger age group, which leads me to get very excited when we come together like this and talk very openly about the fact there is now a need, and how can we come together and put models into practice so that we actually change that situation going forward. This was a conversation that I had with some other people in Cambridge recently. I understand prescriptive education, and we need to introduce into activities once you've done one or two that are slightly more traditional. I do believe children are very good at saying, well, this is what I remember from the story, and this is the aspect I would like to focus on, and I really believe in letting them do that. And finally, because I'm an author, I thought it might be nice to give a flavour of what I do simply by reading one of my stories, so that people can understand what all of the Little Helpers do, which is ultimately to ensure that children are very focused on how can we help the beautiful world that we live in, how can we take the issues we're presented with, and using our imaginations and fun, come up with solutions to solve these issues, to ensure that going forward we're able to do something of a better job than we have perhaps been doing in recent years. I'll just stop that share for now. Antoinette, is it okay? Can I just check? Are you going to be able to see if I hold the book up like that?
Not really. It's a bit blurry, unless you have to bring it very close to it. Yeah.
Okay, it's the pictures obviously that are important in that case. Then just to finish up, I thought it would be nice to read Paula helps prevent air pollution. Just to share one of the Little Helpers stories with you about a topic that is very, very present at the moment in the news worldwide, because the air we breathe is, of course, for all of us around the world, one of the fundamentals every day, if indeed we're going to carry on and do anything in the future. I've got Paula here with me to help tell the story. So, Paula is a parrot. She's a squawky, talky parrot. Paula loves the sound of her own voice. As she's young, she's only just discovering the different noises she can make. Squawk, squawk, squawk. Paula is also an adventurous parrot. She loves flying through the trees in the rainforest from branch to branch. Her mother always tells her to be careful and not to go too far. And there's her mother telling her not to go too far. Paula and her friends like to fly around and make lots of noise when visitors come to see them in the forest. The visitors take photos of them with their cameras. Click, click, click. It's almost like the parrots are film stars. And there's the parrots having photos taken of them. Unfortunately, some days Paula has a cough. Her best friend Priya often has a cough at the same time. On these days, their mothers don't let them go out to play. So they stay at home and they rest their little voices. Paula and Priya don't really understand why they keep coughing. It seems to happen when there are lots of visitors in the forest. One day, Paula is at home. Her mother has given her some berries to help her throat and told her to rest her voice and her little wings. Paula still likes to look down from her home and watch all the visitors arriving in the forest. Mum, my throat hurts again, says Paula in between coughs. I know, dear, but if you rest your voice today, then tomorrow you'll feel much better, says her mum. She gives Paula's back a gentle stroke with her wing. But why does the cough keep coming back? Asks Paula, a little scared. Is it something serious? Oh no, says her mum. The cough you have is because of the cars that come to the forest. Some of them have bad engines that produce fumes, which make the air dirty. That causes air pollution, she explains. The fumes get stuck in your throat if you get too near to them. You young parrots like to fly around close to the visitors, so the fumes get into your beaks. Do all cars make me cough? Paula asks. There are some cars with good engines, Paula's mum explains. Those cars don't make fumes at all. They're better for your throat and for the air too. They're even better for the trees in the forest. And there's Paula and Priya flying around with the cars that have good engines. Paula thinks this is really interesting. And when she's better, she rushes to tell Priya. What do you think we should do? Asks Priya. I like flying around the visitors, but I don't want to keep getting a cough. Paula, who is a very adventurous parrot, can't bear the thought of not being able to fly around. So she starts to think. And then she has an idea. Perhaps we could just fly around the visitors that come on a bicycle or on foot, she suggests. That's a really good idea, says Priya. Maybe we could fly around the visitors that come in good cars with good engines too. We'll just avoid the visitors who come in cars with bad engines that make fumes. Perfect, squawks Paula. And so, once they are better, Paula and Priya put on a display for the visitors again, flying up, down, and all around, screeching and squawking at the top of their voices. However, they make sure to avoid visitors who come in the cars that make bad fumes. This probably leaves some visitors very confused. They've been told you can always see parrots in this forest. Yet some visitors don't see any parrots at all. As the visitors realise over time what is happening, more and more of them arrive in cars with good engines, or on bicycles, or even on foot. Paula and Priya notice that their coughs have stopped, so they can fly around the visitors again. Everyone is happier. The visitors get to see the parrots, click, 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 click. And Paula and Priya have helped make the air in their forest much cleaner. That's the end of our story. Thank you so much indeed for inviting us along today. And the Little Helpers message that I suppose they'd most love to leave you with is that there is so much potential by telling new stories to children and allowing them to create their own, for us to create a brand new world where we all help each other and where nature is definitely at the very heart of things. Thanks ever so much.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Claire. And now, Mario, on that note, new stories. No, I'll pass on to you. I'll just put the spotlight, and there we go.
Thank you, Antoinette. Wow, what two amazing speakers. Cindy, that was such a clarion call that you gave us. And just seeing how Claire's getting out there and spreading the message, it's just so exciting to be sharing today with you. So, how have I come to some of the ideas that you guys have come to by hard work and understanding about the environment? Well, I've had two jobs in my life, and I thought both of them were the best jobs in the world. First, as a storyteller, telling stories for a living. How cool is that? And before that, I was an educator, and that too for me was the best job in the world, because I worked with early years. Excuse me. And when you're working with very young children, it seems to me that's the part of it, the part of the education system where you get closest to treating children as equal partners in learning. In the early years, we think that young children know what they need. They know when they're tired, they know when they're hungry, they know when they need to run about, and know when they need to sit still. And just so they know what they need to learn and how to go about it. Children's play, however aimless it may seem to you as an outsider, once you're there alongside them, you see that they know what they need to find out about and how they're going to explore it. So our job as educators is just to sit alongside them, to give them food for their mind and their spirits and their muscles, to give them the chance to exercise their learning, to try out new ideas and new skills. But partly through listening to people like Cindy and Claire and finding out just how important it is that children find out about climate education, suddenly being a storyteller, being a teacher didn't seem to be enough. But that came with questions for me. How do you tell very young children that the planet they live on may hit terrible problems in their lifetime? How do you give them hope in the future without trivializing the problem, without letting them think, oh, I'll just recycle this bottle and everything will be fine? And most important, how do I, as a member of a generation who helped trash this planet, how do I tell children how they should look after their planet? Well, Cindy and Claire have come up with some really good answers to these questions, but I came to it through stories, and stories have given me the answers I needed. So the story I told from the canoe race that comes from the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands really are threatened by rising seas, and we in the Fens, we need to watch them carefully and learn from what they're doing. And yes, they think that what they're going to take with them when they have to leave their home is their hereditary knowledge, their ancestors, their stories and their culture. But in some versions of that story, there's a part that I left out of mine. And it's when the youngest brother, Jabro, he and his mother are flying past all the other brothers, way ahead of them with their sail. And at last they get to the oldest brother, Timur, and he looks across at his brother and he says, I'm the oldest. You should respect your elders. I want your boat. We're going to swap. Jabro, he looks at his mum and she nods, yes. That's why you got the sail, because you respected your ancestors. And so they swap boats. So Timur, the oldest, now has the boat with the sail, and Jabro and his mum are in a plain old canoe. But Jabro's mum, when she moves into the new boat, she takes one of the blocks that tie the tackle up to the sail. And so the oldest brother, he goes shooting off across the sea in completely the wrong direction because he can't angle the sail. And the thing I take from that is the idea that, yes, you give children the knowledge, your knowledge, but you show them what to do with it. And the direction they choose to take is their decision, and it's what they're going to do to take us forward. So, I work with traditional stories for a number of reasons. One is that a lot of, in this country particularly, a lot of our traditional stories are rooted in a pre-industrial landscape, and a lot of them are about the place we live in, our earth, and how to look after it. And also, because they're so old, they're tongue polished. They've been told by generation after generation. And each generation brings their own preoccupations and their values. And with each generation, those sort of surface things fall away, and you're left with the pure core, the hard core of the story, the deep symbolism. But it's not just abstract ideas. It's clothed in real people and real feelings. And it makes it easier for the very youngest children to engage and understand it. Keats called this negative capability, the idea that in a poem or in a story, we can understand something that's too complex for us to grasp intellectually. I like to quote the educationist Jerome Bruner, and I think it's the same for play as it is for stories. He says, in play, it's as if a child is a head taller than themselves. And another thing about stories is traditional stories is they don't have just one moral. They're rich and quite complex morals or messages. They're like bits of mirror. And what I see in the mirror is something completely different from what my listeners will see. Everyone will have a different thing they take from the story. For some, it's a story about new and sustainable energy. For some, it's a story about ancestors. And the questions that come out of it are different. For a child, it's why? Why did Jabro do what his mother said when none of the other brothers had? What would you do if your mother asked you to do something you really, really didn't want to do? And for adults, it's maybe a different thing. It's what do you do when you've got this precious knowledge you want to give your children and they're in too much of a hurry to listen? So lots of different things coming out of one story. So when I tell my stories, they always end with questions. And to build these stories into something to do with, to help get children thinking about climate change, Cindy mentioned Pava Dasgupta, and he said this amazing thing. He said that to educate children about our planet as a precious finite resource, he said you start in your own backyard. You start with the birds in your garden. He said, to understand the mysteries of the natural world is the beginnings of a love affair. You can't love something unless you know something of the way the system works. So the project I've been working on for quite a lot of the past year is a set of 17 stories, and each one of them is connected to one of those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But also each of them is connected with a natural object. It could be wind power, it could be pandanus leaves, it could be mud. And each of the stories, I'm hoping to tell them outside in nature, but even if I'm telling them online, each of them is going to end with activities that will get children outside, get them into nature, and getting their hands and their knees muddy. And I just wanted to finish with a quote from the poet Alice Oswald. She did this extraordinary lecture on behalf of a pebble, and she talked about the mnemonic function of natural objects in preserving moral codes. And what she meant was something that's very common among creation stories, that a story gives meaning to an object, and the object holds the story. So when you see the stars in the sky, the Pleiades, you remember Jebro and you remember how important it is to have a wise guide. If you've sat under an oak tree to hear the story of Henny Penny, the one, you know, an acorn falls on her head and she goes off to tell the king that the sky's falling. Once you've heard that story and seen an acorn, you're going to recognize an acorn next time you see it. Next time you see an acorn, you're going to remember Henny Penny and remember how she went to speak truth to power, even though you know it's going to end badly for her. So my stories, I hope, are going to give meaning to the natural world and take meaning from the natural world as well. So that's where I am. I was so excited that what I was thinking fitted so well with what the two of you were saying as well. So thank you.
That's wonderful, Marion. Now we'll open up for Q&A. So I'm just going to put you on a spotlight now, so all of you are on the screen. Let me see here. With my screen. Yeah, the three of you are there. And then we could try something different as well. We could see if the people have up the questions, if they want to actually ask them themselves. So have here Kate. Kate, I'm just going to allow you to talk, basically. If you want to ask the question yourself, are you able to say hello?
Hi.
Brilliant.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Wow, you guys were, what a fantastic team. I'm so grateful to have heard each of your presentations. They all hang together in a way that illustrates what you're talking about, which is the power of interconnection. So my question was really about valuing the invisible. I'm also an educator by training and children's book author, and I've come to see that there can be some challenges in getting underneath what we're really talking about with the children. So I'd love to hear from you about what you think some of the priority pieces would be, because we're coming up to the end of this academic year and it's been pretty disrupted. What would you think would be some things to focus on to support the children in our lives?
Claire, do you want to go first?
Yeah, can you hear me? Am I okay? I'm off mute?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's a beautiful way of putting things, which I haven't heard before, but valuing the invisible, because I think we all instantaneously know what those invisible things are, and more so as adults, but are now realizing we perhaps need to explicitly explain to youngsters what they are so that they know to have to place importance on them. So in terms of the invisibles that I feel are incredibly valuable and that we need to be teaching children about, it is things like compassion, helping both others and the world around us, things that can't be touched, but these incredible aspects of humanity which again, humanity is not a tangible entity, but it's an invisible entity that it's absolutely essential that children learn to value and to with them we promote and encourage with them, alongside some of the invisible elements, like we must value the air that we breathe. We must value our ability to communicate with others, to talk to others, to be able to come up with solutions to the problems that we and the earth face. They're some of the first things, Kate, that spring to mind with that incredible expression that you've used, valuing the invisible. I thought that was wonderful.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Claire. Yeah, Marion, you want to go?
Well, yes, I think it's a really big problem. My granddaughter, she says things to me like, well, I care for the environment. And I think that's a lovely thing that you're saying, but you don't terribly know what that means. I think it's really hard to convey those things to children, except in practical things. And for me, that's about living what I do. So as a storyteller in the past, what I love doing is loading my car up with loads and loads of stuffs and props and driving hundreds of miles to do a storytelling show. And if I'm telling stories about sustainable development, I can't do that. So I've got to think about using fewer props, not using my car, using public transport. I've got to live the values that I want my children to understand. Otherwise, they're going to learn the invisibles from what I do.
Cindy?
Yeah, it is a really lovely question, Kate, and thanks for that really kind feedback about our presentations. Yeah, well, I think it is a key question, and it is about the whole, for me, the web of life. You have got the emotional invisibles that Claire spoke to: compassion, kindness, empathy. And I think that there's also the connections that we can't see that make life here, that are actually energetic connections that make life here possible. So with young children, I think there's some key, absolute huge things that keep life going on this planet, that that they can understand. And one of those three of them, I would say, is oceans, forests, and food. And if you can, there's so many stories that you can tell for how every second breath we take actually is made by, basically the oceans make 50% of our air, and the forests the oceans make slightly more, actually, the forests make the rest. So you can actually, air, where does it come from? You can trace that breath all the way down into the sea. You could take a fish as a character, you can show how that fish is part of the absolutely fantastic carbon cycle, from grabbing that little bit of phytoplankton and taking it all the way down through its own digestive system, pooping it out at the bottom, storing it in the deep sea forever, and then that's making our air so beautifully clean that we can breathe it. You could do the same for forests. And I think food is a really important one, because so many of us just go to the supermarket and pick up that thing. But if you actually start telling the story of your smoked salmon, as George Monbiot was doing incredibly brilliantly, I don't know if anybody saw that on Double Down News, or your apple, or your peanut butter sandwich, that will take you right across the world, and you'll have some fantastic things in that story, and you'll have some sad things in that story, but it will bring out so many questions and so many unseens, that I think it's quite a magical journey. You can even do it with a teacup, but if you start telling the story of how things got there, you reveal a lot of the things that aren't seen, and the stories that you can tell around them also bring in the emotions, the compassion for the people that work in the fish farms, or the people when the packaging gets thrown away, what happens to their lives and the things. And then they're, I'm sure that with young children, it's important to keep things very upbeat and happy. So if it's not, if there's elements in the story that aren't great, then let's find the solutions to them. And yeah, so I hope that's a help too.
That was all fantastic, and the interconnections that just sprang to mind, that we're really looking at intra-connections, the connection of our heart to our heads. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate, for the question. Now I have Tom. Tom, would you like to actually ask your questions as well? Can you unmute yourself? Brilliant. Now.
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is this. Is our educational system fundamentally broken so that, as Bucky Fuller said, we should just start with something new? Or are there ways to save our children's current experience of schooling?
Well, I think that's a very important question, Tom, and it's really pragmatic because you did pick up Mr. Fuller, don't argue with the model, but we do have to go through and build a new one. But we do have to go through a transition phase, I think, to get there. And I think the other thing that's so fantastic about the schools is the teachers. They're just so, every teacher I meet is a wonderful, creative person. And I think teachers have a sense of being trapped in this system as well. So I do think there's a lot. It does lead. I hope we get to speak to Maria because you've asked a very interesting question. But I think that as a world, actually, we are becoming aware of the need to change education. It is something that will be discussed at COP26, the big conference that's coming up in November. And I think one of the things is that if teachers feel mandated to do this, because they're so overstretched in their own lives at the moment that it's hard to get things onto the curriculum if they're not mandated. But given the mandate, I think that there's a huge amount that teachers can actually do with the school system that we have. And I think that has to be where we begin, because I don't think it's realistic to say that overnight you can just, we can just wave a magic wand and have a completely different education system. So I would say, I think we can start with schools, but I think we need to do everything that we can to let the schools know that this is what we would like to see coming into the into how we educate our children. And if you've got any influence with your MPs and in the political advocacy arena, push hard to get the change there too, so that their teachers can actually do the job that they signed up for and that they really want to be part of. Because I haven't spoken to a single teacher yet who doesn't think this is incredibly relevant and a lot more important than the stuff that they sometimes are asked to teach.
Marion, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, the early years answer, I am biased, is that we have a clear philosophy and we've got it sorted, and we can just do those really important things in the moment with the children. But that's quite a partial view, because was it Cindy, your statistic that 3% of the population go to university and 70%, and then they become 70% of the rulers? So there is this very unequal system that's starting fueled by education and is spreading through the whole of society. So I think it's not enough for us early years people to say, oh, well, we've got it right. I think there's got to be a big change.
The only thing I would add, I think, to that potentially is, I think there are lots of positives, particularly at the very, very lower end of education, where things are still currently very holistic. There's a lot of play involved, a lot of enjoyment, a lot of fun, hoping to instill in children values surrounding their humanity, their ability to interconnect, communicate, support each other, that could definitely be reinforced. They're the very things that all teachers I know, and I myself as a teacher, love to be involved with, and that all children respond incredibly well to, and possibly could look to remove some of the things that the very participants in education say they feel are not of the most benefit. So when we go to secondary and things become slightly more divisive and we must do subjects discreetly, for example, I think there's a lot of elements in our education system that teachers and students highlight as feeling they are of immense benefit to them. And to support Cindy, we would be well versed, and when I say that I mean politicians and the people who actually have huge decision-making power, to listen to those in the system and their voice and what they are telling us they need, because it seems quite clear that they know which aspects of the existing system are working well and they want more of.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. Now, the next question comes from Maria, but her microphone is not working, so I'll just read the question. So it's says, to change the discourse on how education currently stands, do we need to look beyond education? Is there a lack in society as a whole on how we engage with the world in general? So, who wants to tackle that one first? Cindy?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the beautiful question we had about the invisible, making the visible visible. I think, yeah, you can't tackle this in isolation. How we educate our children affects the world that we have. How we educate our children affects who you get to work for you, who comes out the other end, who can take. So it really is a systemic issue. And you know, I think the other part of the work that I'm doing, I know to some extent, Claire and possibly Marion, is advocacy, that we actually do take this out of the realm of the classroom and something that just belongs to teachers, and actually put it at the policy level, the global policy level. I mentioned that we had the COP26 coming up, and there's a representation from over 100 countries in the world that are asking for what's been called climate education, actually, to be made mandatory. That's at UN level as well, and actually the Pope is involved in something called the Global Compact, and it's something that's being addressed there. So there is, you know, that's really encouraging. There is a groundswell for this to be addressed systemically, and I think it really has to be, to get the shifts that need to happen, because as I said in answer to Tom's question, if it remains something that is just left in schools, the teachers just don't have the bandwidth to do anything, to do as much about it as actually needs to be done. So if we want to solve our global systems crisis, we need to, a huge part of that is how we educate our children to be the innovators and entrepreneurs who understand, as Marion says, how to use those sail blocks and to turn the direction of the ship. And in order to get that to happen, we have to get something to happen at governance level, to change the curriculum and to change the medium of education from the early years onwards.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because is education a mirror of society, or is society a mirror of our education? There's a beautiful bit in Anna Karenina. So Tolstoy's created this character who goes around saying, education, education, education. It's my God, everyone should be educated. And he meets this chap Levine, who's gone off, sort of dropped out of society to become a farmer and look after his own estate. And Levine says, you remind me of the henwife in my village. When so-and-so's son was sick with a breathing problem, she told them to put him on top of the chicken coop overnight, and that would cure his problems. And the guy says, you see, I told you, education is what we need. And Levine says, no, I was thinking you were a bit like the henwife. You're saying that to educate starving peasants who have nothing and no way of knowing how they're going to survive the winter, to give them education is a bit like putting the baby on top of the hen coop. So I think it is a much wider problem than education. And it's true, education is a good way to change society, but you can't make teachers do the whole thing.
And I would just reiterate that it's all too easy to pass the buck to one element and say, well, actually, what we'll do is, this will just be done in schools. Teachers, you just sort this problem out. And it's a systemic and societal issue that from the very top echelons of those with power, people like the Pope, politicians, right down to siblings, older siblings of children, parents, grandparents, we need to be working together as a society to address these issues. It's that we also need, for that period of time that the children are seemingly going to be in a classroom over many years of their lives, to be supporting that in a formal environment, so that obviously we know it's something all children are being exposed to, but most definitely extends way beyond just education or the education system, I feel, as well. That's a really good question.
Now, just to continue with that, so how do we shape the story? How do we encourage values? Do we say that everybody is an equal partner? Is it an issue of generational values, or is it a way of how we view Earth? As Cindy put on the quotes of Wade Davis, is it resources or is it a living thing? I mean, how do we change all that discourse? Anybody have want to say that? Yeah.
I'm looking at you other two guys because you're the people with the answers. And I will say, the one thing that gave me hope recently, I spent 20 minutes with a 2-year-old. I was watching a 2-year-old watching a bumblebee. And I think if there's that level of engagement in our very youngest children, that's my little bit of hope.
And to support that, because I obviously work with very, very young children predominantly at the minute as well, sometimes I think to change the narrative, is it perhaps a case of, instead of us thinking, what can we teach the next generation, can we listen to what the next generation, as they are in that beautiful form in which they are born and in their early years, what they can teach us, because they seem to be very much in touch with what is needed in the world going forward. Very, very aware of the importance of the preservation and reverence for nature. So perhaps it's very much a case of us taking our lead often from them as well, instead of deciding what it is that we must then have them focus on, letting them take us the lead so that we know what it is they want to focus on and what comes very naturally to them.
I think that's really, really good thoughts, and I'm really delighted that you opened with the story that you did, Marion, because I think it is an intergenerational thing. I think you're absolutely. I think children do land eco-literate, and then whatever the prevailing values of the society they're in are the ones that shape their journey. I mean, we've got hugely courageous young people standing up all over the world now, asking for a different type of governance of the planet, and we've got the young founders of Teach the Future, who are very really clear about what they want to learn. So I think it is we can really listen and hear, and then have the wisdom to acknowledge what we've done poorly and what we've done well, and start to really reshape our values so that they lean towards the ones that do sustain life. And I think that can happen. There are really positive. There's a lot of bad news out there at the moment, but we see some really, really positive stories that have happened relatively quickly, because society has shifted. It's understood that in order to live more harmoniously here, we need to change our values. We've seen that around race, but certainly not all the way there. We've seen it around, even more recently, rights around gender, around sexuality, things that somebody born, when our parents were born, it'd be unthinkable to see that those are now values that we hold as inviolate in the society. There's, I'm not denying that the prejudice still exists, and there's a way to go before they're really lived and felt, but at least we've codified those values as ones that we need. And there's a fabulous organisation called Stop Ecocide that's been led by Jojo Mater, which is trying to get ecocide as a law in the international criminal courts, and that's picked up a huge amount of momentum over the last couple of years. That would be so fantastic to see that as an international value, that large scale damage to ecosystems is a crime on a par with genocide. And so we are moving in that directions from what happens with the child watching the bumblebee and being able to really absorb that as a part of hugely important learning to the global governance level, where our values say you do not harm nature on this scale.
So, thinking of another question, just was focusing on the keywords you've mentioned, sort of solutions and then enabling and then helping and power is knowledge. So if you're going to view not the answers, but finding solutions from a positive point of view, so it's not all too dark and sort of looming, how do we encourage sort of positive solutions, or solutions, sometimes they're not positive, but how do you encourage that at a local level, and how do you influence that local level to bring it higher? I mean, is it through just pure storytelling? Is it through something else? What are your views on that?
I think a mixture of what various people have said thus far. Storytelling, incredibly powerful, I think, along with living your values, as was also mentioned, and thus setting an example, so taking action and others around you seeing what it is that you are doing, and realizing that solution I find engaging. Solutions can often be enjoyable and fun and satisfying, and that element, I think, needs great focus. There are many, many incredible solutions already out there. We need to be making certainly youngsters, but the populace as a whole, aware, so that they see the exciting nature of solving these issues that we're presented with, that it is challenging, but can be incredibly gratifying when you are able to participate in that in some way.
Yes, I really agree with that. I started getting interested in making stories to fit the development goals through, I did some work for a charity, a wonderful charity called Little Hands Textiles. And Astrid, who runs the charity, says that in terms, when you're trying to make people be more sustainable, it's got to be win-win. It can't be, oh, you can't do this anymore, you can't do that anymore. But say, by being more sustainable, you're actually making your life better. And she does this brilliant thing. She does sewing class, after school sewing classes in schools. And she teaches climate change, climate education through the sewing classes. And she gets the children to think about fast fashion and about making instead of buying, and about remaking and recycling. And it's just, the whole thing she does is just completely joyful. So I think that's a...
Sounds lovely. I want to come.
I'll put you in touch.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think that's a great question, Antoinette. Thanks very much for asking. And I have to say I was really delighted to have been asked by Welbeck, a fabulous children's, or a publisher with a fantastic children's division, to write a book called Bright New World, which is exactly that. And the way the book works, it's not going to be out, it'll be out next year, is that we start with how wonderful Earth can be. We lead with the solutions on the major things like food. These are neutral things: food, energy, transport. Our carbon sinks, oceans, rainforests. They're neither positive or negative. It's what we decide to do with them. Transport, education for girls, and so we tell this glorious story of how wonderful, how we can go from where we are now to something where these problems have been largely put under control. And then we actually look at what we have already towards those, towards getting there. And the truth is that we have almost all of the solutions. There's some wonderful things in development that will make it even easier for us to achieve these things, but most of the solutions that we need are here already. We don't really need we don't need more scientific research into climate change. We know what the problem is. We don't need more tech. Tech will be a huge help, but we've already got enough to be getting on with. And the main issue is just having that inspiration to believe that it's possible and get on and do it. And so for the children, the story is, this is actually one of the most exciting times to be alive. You get to learn how to fly this small planet and to be part of this incredibly exciting transformation. So I definitely think in this space of speaking to children, that's the approach to take, to lead with the huge opportunity that we have to create something wonderful here, which is utterly real and utterly doable. Challenging, yes, but doable, certainly.
Thank you, Cindy. And now you've mentioned, an this, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's something that is starting to just appear a bit more into, into the vocabulary around us. But do you think that in general, people feel that the Sustainable Development Goals is something that it doesn't apply to this part of the world because we don't need them? And in fact, there are many places, and then you talk about food, for example. So do you think there's something lacking there that perhaps being a bit egocentric, say, well, we don't need them, because why? And so what's your opinion on that? Is it something that it needs to be pushed a bit more?
Well, I think you've hit on something really important there, and Antoinette, it's how things are communicated. I mean, there's been a massive and beautiful communication campaign behind the goals, but there's still a vast amount of people who've never heard of them, but no fault of their own. It's just, what we live our lives in this space. You hear it all the time. So there's that issue that hasn't come through to the public consciousness, and then there's the issue that you say, why do we think that we don't need them? To be honest, I'm less inclined to that view. I think people are very aware, whether they're aware of the goals or not. They are aware of the of the systems crisis, whether it's just because it's climate change, whether it's simply climate change or other things. Food is really interesting, though. Food has got the potential to have such a massive effect on on solving a lot of our systems crisis, but I think that is a story that hasn't been told, how absolutely destructive our current model for producing food is. So that I think it's people will think, oh no, we don't need anything, I just want, I'm just going to get my whatever it is, and I can't see the connections with that. So I think that's something really, given the impact that we can have and how we change food, I think that, so it does come back often to political will, or for to have the to actually tell these stories, and that comes back to economics, because it's not economically expedient to radically transform the food system, so the stories don't get out there, though that there are wonderful ways of telling that story, and there's people who are doing it. We just need more airtime. I'm conscious of the time. I'd like to mention Kate Rayworth's work on that again. She's done this brilliant axis of where which countries are developed, and actually none of them are, because you've got an hopefully I'll get this right, at the y-axis you've got the countries that have attained what we would call developed status, but then you actually look at the cost of that to the environment. So all the developed countries are way over in the right hand corner, because they've got the development, but it's come at huge cost to the environment. And then the countries that have had a less environmental impact haven't achieved the development goals. So nobody's in that magic spot, which is, I don't know, my visual memory isn't good, so that would be the top left hand corner, where you've actually got your impact and environments are regenerative or sustainable, and you've actually got a developed society. So none of us are actually in a position to say that, but where we know we are, or where we think we are, is another thing, and that does come back again to the stories that we're told or that we're able to hear.
Mm-hmm. Then Claire or Marion, would you like to add anything to what Cindy said?
In terms of sustainable development goals, even when I was working with governments in a sort of previous incarnation, because I've obviously been around for a while now, the issue has always been that the purpose they serve is incredible, getting them out to the masses, which is why it is so important to start to address that with the youngest members of the next generation. But it would possibly also be very, very helpful if the means by which we generally get things out to large swathes of the population around the world, such as media, advertising, would get on board and very simply could show the ways in which they're supporting, be it 1, 2, or 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So there is, I agree with Cindy, there's a communication issue at the moment. Many people are still unaware of what they are, and sometimes when they know they exist, they seem to think, well, that's okay because somebody's dealing with that, and it's good to know they're there. Someone's obviously working on that, when in fact the emphasis needs to be on Sustainable Development Goals, are something that every single human being on the planet should be working to support. So I think there's more work to be done for something that's very well thought through and is very comprehensive, which indeed they are.
Marion and
It was
we're with the time.
actually-
Yeah.
It was one of the questions I put for story about zero hunger. I said, look, we've got enough to eat in our society. We're fine. Why should we worry about hunger? And it was a great question because I heard some girls debating it, and they were outraged about the thought that it didn't apply to their society. And they had all these really brilliant arguments. So I think that's a question that needs asking a lot and often.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Now, I mean, unfortunately, we've reached our time now, but I mean, it's that this debate could be going on and the conversation could be going on for much longer. I mean, hopefully we'll be able to have another panel sometime soon just to keep discussing perhaps, you know, the issue of hunger and how it applies and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much, Marion, Cindy, and Claire for joining us, and to the audience as well. And just before we leave, I'll just put the slide up of where you can find more information about the festival. And this is being recorded, so will be posted out on our YouTube channel. And let me just check here the screen. So there we go. So that's where you can find us. Oh, next slide. There we go. And if you want to know more about us as well, you can always sign to our newsletter or find us on social media. And for the other events, you can just go to the festival website, which is on the screen. So have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much.